Here's the contract.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is the appointed hour of 7:05. We have a slight delay from a very robust and informative Planning Commission joint meeting. Great thanks to the Planning Commission for joining us at the 6 o'clock hour, but delayed us 5 minutes. I would like to call the meeting to order and ask you all to please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you all very much. I'll note that Doug Harwood is not in the audience this evening, and I think that's because the advocate came out yesterday, and he was, or actually earlier today, and he was out beating the streets delivering, so I imagine he wore himself out. But I'm sure he'll listen in and report accordingly. Next item on the agenda is consideration of the agenda. Were there any additions or corrections? I hope everyone did get the opportunity to, or the information regarding under consent agenda for Washington and Lee, looking to close the street for a furniture delivery. That was brought about by Mark Riley. And I'm not aware of anything else. And not seeing any indication from council, we'll adopt the agenda as presented. Next is proclamation. I do not think anybody is here, but I'd like to, I will spare you the reading of the proclamation declaring Monday, July 5th, 2021 as the 26th Amendment Day in Lexington, but direct you to that part in your packet and realize that it was 50 years ago that the 26th Amendment of the United States Constitution took effect, lowering the universal voting age in America from 21 to age 18. Interesting information, and I encourage all to reflect on that and all the benefits of the Constitution, but acknowledge July 5th as the 26th Amendment Day celebrated in Lexington this year. Next item would be presentations, and I'd like to call on Eric Wilson for a minute in history. Welcome, Eric.
Figuring out whether we're in 3 dimensions or 2 or flat.
Eric, if you could, yes, punch that. Thank you, sir. Perfect.
Is that live? Sounds
Yes.
live. And thank you, Janie, for printing this out. I've also shared a slide of what we'll be talking about for the minutes. On June 17th, the Virginia Department of Historic Resources approved another historical roadside marker for this area, recognizing the significance of Lilburn Downing School, in which we meet. Replacing the overcrowded graded school on South Randolph Street, Downing opened in 1927 to serve African-American students across Rockbridge County before local schools desegregated in 1965, a decade after the Brown v. Board decision. In her companion remarks in a moment, Vice Mayor Alexander will speak more specifically and personally to the school's significance and the importance of this community recognition. As it happens, the Virginia Highway Marker Program also began in 1927. In nearly a century of historic commemoration, it now includes more than 2,600 state markers maintained by the Virginia Department of Transportation. As the DHR notes, this program, quote, creates markers not to honor their subjects, but rather to educate and inform the public about a person, place, or event of regional, state, or national importance. In this regard, erected markers are not memorials. For this year's selections in 2021, 15 of 17 proposed historical markers recently approved for manufacture were called people, places, or events in Virginia's African American history, including several topics submitted by students who participated in Governor Northam's Black History Marker contest in February. After DHR contacted the city manager in May to advance the nomination, I worked with the vice mayor to shape the text that appears on the sign. And I'll read it aloud in a second in an effort to make sure that it wasn't a sign that simply advanced the biography of a central figure, but of a community, and really leading with the parents and citizens who drove that forward. So it reads as such. Lilburn Downing School opened here in 1927 after the Home and School League, an organization of local black parents and citizens, campaigned for equitable schools. Built with financial support from the black community, Rockbridge County, and the Rosenwald Fund, the countywide school first serves grades 1 through 9 and expanded to include a high school in the 1940s. Desegregation closed the original edifice in 1965, but the newer buildings became Lexington's middle school. Lilburn Downing was born enslaved in Lexington, attended Lincoln University, and was pastor of Roanoke's Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church for more than 40 years. He was a longtime advocate for African American education. We'll be looking forward to working with the city for an appropriate time for installation and commemoration, looking to coordinate with the city schools. I talked with Superintendent Walters about that. She's very eager, and certainly foremost among them to engage the Downing alumni community in a meaningful recognition of this important history. And to that end, I will pass over to the Vice Mayor for her own thoughts.
Thank you, Eric. The education of black citizens in Lexington has quite a history. And being a product of that experience, I wanted to share a little of what I know with you. Like Representative Maxine Waters often says, I will claim my time, but just a few moments. A woman in the North who was named Jane Cobb purchased the building located beside Randolph Street United Methodist Church, which is the current location of Rates and Hawkins today, to use as a school at that time for white boys. But when the Civil War ended, Jane Cobb became involved with the Quakers and transformed her school into one for freed children. During Reconstruction, it was referred to as the Freedmen's School. That name was derived from the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, otherwise known as the Freedmen's Bureau, which you may have heard of before. This was established what was known as the Lexington Colored Grade School in 1865. And I do recall hearing some stories in the last few years about children being told that children were walking to school who were being taunted, harassed, and bullied by cadets at that time. Then the school finally closed in 1927, and in a conversation that Dr. Ted Delaney had with Dr. A.W. Pleasance Jr., he said that Dr. Pleasance revealed to him that the conditions of the school had become deplorable just prior to the closing in 1927. In that same year, the newly constructed Lilburn Downing School opened for black students on September 11th, 1927. Families placing great value in education continued their migration from the county to get their children closer to school in Lexington, such as families from the black communities in Collierstown, Fairfield, and beyond. And these were significant populations of people in those areas. However, it is said that the response did have mixed feelings in the black community. There was an overall elation over the new school being a new school, but they were disappointed that it was not built large enough to accommodate high school grades. Rockbridge County said that the demand for a Negro school was insufficient, which was not the case at all. So, parents, being as resourceful as they were, they started sending their high school age students away after the Lilburn Downing experience on to institutions all over the state and even out of state to complete their high school requirements. The closest and most popular was the Christiansburg Institute, which today it still exists, and it's just a building that's being, I think, renovated for historic purposes to keep it open for historic museum type purposes. More so, in the 1950s and 60s, a few of our concerned black citizens in Lexington opened nursery schools in their homes to ensure that young people were well prepared for the first grade curriculum at Lilburn Downing. Over 20 years later, the Lexington Town Council approved funding for a high school building on the Lilburn Downing campus, which opened in 1949. The gym where we're meeting right here at this moment was constructed in 1957. This building was the third in a series of projects to ensure that all the Black children from as far as even the remote areas of Goshen, Racine, Natural Bridge, and so on could be bused to and from this location daily to be educated. There's tremendous Trojan pride in this rich learning environment where Trojans are represented worldwide as alumni moved on to college, trade schools. They became entrepreneurs in salons, barbershops, restaurants, nursery and daycare, grocery stores, real estate and catering, as well as working in industries such as the railroad, banking, airlines, and careers in public school as teachers, in college administration, professors, instructors. They were doctors, nurses, pharmacists, detectives, and other law enforcement positions. They were career military, government, nuclear power plant employees, computer scientists, coaching, and I think maybe you might know one or two elected officials along the way. So there aren't many places that you can go where there isn't some ancestral connection to this school. And having this recognition with the state historical marker is one of the greatest honors that can be bestowed upon this building, the insurmountable obstacles of segregation, and every individual who benefited by attending this school from the first class in 1927 to the last in 1965. Thank you.
Wow. Only thing better than an Eric Wilson A Minute in History is complemented by Ms. Alexander's observations and details. Thank you for that educational and inspirational reading and sharing the history. I sit beside you as a proud Trojan, having graduated from here once the school gathered for the entire community.
Absolutely.
Thank you, thank you. The next item on the agenda, I will call on Jake, the GFOA Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, council members. It's good to be with you this evening. Just very briefly, we received word early last week that the City of Lexington were recipients of the 2020 Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. So this is the award that we apply for each year after our comprehensive annual financial report or our audit report is finished. So I'm very, very pleased to report that we qualified and received the certificate again, keeping the long streak going. This is now 28 consecutive years that the city has received this, and it's a very distinguished honor. It requires a great bit of good work done in accounting and reporting, and a good final product with that annual audit report that you all see. So, of course, this is a team effort, so I'd just briefly like to thank all of our city staff that assist with the audit process, Treasurer's Office, the Commissioner's Office, Finance Department. Teresa Hartless and Tommy Roberts are invaluable for their help in this audit report, and as well as our audit team from Robinson Farmer Cox, Emily Veers, who heads up that team. They're a very professional audit team, and they do a great job every year. So just wanted to bring this to your attention. This certificate will be posted in our upcoming FY21 audit when we get to that point later this year. So that will be in that booklet for the world to see that we yet again won this award. So just wanted to bring this to your attention. If there are any other questions about it, I'd be happy to answer them.
If I may comment, council members, Mr. Mayor, it was a team effort, but this was like Jake getting an MVP award in his rookie year. And I know he sweated a lot and worked hard to make sure that this streak that we had of these awards was not broken under his initial tenure. So he did a great job. He deserves a lot of credit.
Absolutely. Any comments from council? We just add congratulations, the leadership that you've shown in this first year in getting things through COVID. Gary trained you well, showed you where the proper forms are, obviously, and we're grateful for your efforts on behalf of our citizens and our entire city.
Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it.
Next item on the agenda is a public hearing and consideration of ordinance 2021-05. I'd like to call on Arnie to speak to the proposed amendments and update.
Good evening. Good evening to you all. We have been working on zoning text amendments in this annual review since last October. If I could direct you towards page 36 of your packet. It's a little spreadsheet there just to give you an idea of how much the Planning Commission has already worked towards these annual text amendments. As you probably already know, we have what we call a hot file. So as I notice things in my position as zoning administrator, or as Planning Commission comes up with items during their reviews, these little snippets end up going into the hot file just for consideration during the annual zoning text amendments. And we started that back in October, as I mentioned, and then you see the little dates running across the top of the spreadsheet here, beginning with November and their X marks. So those items were either on the agenda for that particular Planning Commission meeting, and again, the dates are for the individual Planning Commission meetings, just to give you an idea of how many times they've already met, how many times there has been an opportunity for public input on these items. And I have to admit that each time there's an X, those weren't always discussed, because sometimes we ran over and not every item was actually discussed on the date that you see here. But just to give you an idea how long we've already been working, we also had 26 items. You have 15 in front of you this evening. We have already briefly mentioned there are going to be 4 more intensive items that are going to take a little bit longer. But the point here is not all of the items also made it to the amendment list. So there were a few that were cut. They were either premature or not needed. So Planning Commission has already done a good bit of work vetting these text amendments for us all. There are also just a couple of other things in the appendix, which is a future land use map, zoning map, those types of background documents in case you need them. And we also put together all of the minutes from those Planning Commission meetings that I just mentioned together in one long PDF and posted them to this website in case anybody was interested from the public to go see after the fact what all the discussions have been so far with the Planning Commission on these text amendments. Before I get into them individually, are there any questions?
Members of council have any questions? And you're asking at this point on the totality, correct?
I also perhaps unfairly realized too late that last year we held a work session instead of just coming up to you cold on a public hearing and here are 15 amendments. We held a work session last year to talk about, I think it was 4 of the more intensive ones at that time, and just sort of didn't remember to do that for you this evening or for this round. So if you want to consider this the first reading, it is an advertised public hearing, but if you want to consider this the first reading, ask all the questions. If I don't know the answers, go back, then we can come back to the next meeting as long as you make a motion to postpone, defer to a date certain. I won't have to re-advertise, but you certainly have that option. You have the option to vote on this tonight, but if you wanted to defer, that would certainly be an easy thing to do.
I would say we'll plow through and see how we get to the end. Arnie, one question I had, I was trying to remember the sunset provision, the short-term rentals. Remind me the logic there and what this does.
We had a provision as we went through short-term rentals, and this is the update in 2017 that was approved. Those short-term rentals that were already in operation could continue operation and not have to immediately abide by the new short-term rental rules and regulations, in particular 3 specific portions of that, until the end or the beginning of 2019. So there was just a period of grace there for those that were already in existence. We're obviously well past 2019, so
Okay.
all of our short-term rentals, as they're renewing or becoming in new, have to abide by the use and design standards for short-term rentals. So that sunset period is gone, and we can just easily delete that item.
Thank you.
That might be the easiest item actually on the list. I'm just going to go through these one at a time unless there are questions.
Just a quick one about that sunset provision. Are you aware of any short-term rental in town who's still availing themselves of those short-term or sunset provisions? I mean,
Well, then they would be in violation of those provisions. So I'm not aware of any violations for short-term rentals, in particular, short-term rentals in those three provisions. If not, if there aren't any more, I'll just go through individually
Please.
and please ask questions as we're going along. And also, these are somewhat in order of the Planning Commission discussion and Planning Commission's sort of approval of the text. So I wanted to run it by Planning Commission first to sort of get the text straight before it even went to their public hearing. The first one is section about exterior lighting exemptions and definitions. In 15.2, there are exemptions to the exterior lighting standards, and exterior lighting standards are basically say that all exterior lighting has to be dark sky compliant. But there are certain instances where you don't really want that to happen, such as FAA mandated lighting. You really can't do much about FAA mandated lighting, so that's an exemption. But in this list, there is a definition for architectural lighting. There's a mention of architectural lighting, but there's no definition included. And then there also have been requests for outdoor gas lanterns and outdoor string lights. So the question was, do we want to include those things into the exemption list? And you see the existing language there in that first part of page 3 of your packet. That's the existing language. And then anything that's underlined in red is the Planning Commission recommendation. So that was the text that was provided to the public for the Planning Commission hearing. In almost all instances, that is the recommendation from Planning Commission. So the first recommendation, item 3, is holiday lighting to strike the words during the months of November, December, and January. So holiday lighting would be exempted from the requirement to have dark sky compliant lighting. It's almost impossible, if not impossible, to find dark sky compliant string lights as an example. And then in addition to that, added to the list of exemptions, string lights and gas lanterns, and specifically added a suggested definition for architectural lighting and also for string lights. Any questions?
Do you mean the string lights like one would put on a deck at their home?
Right.
Okay.
There were a lot of instances. Previously, they were limited in the commercial district to outdoor dining, and I can't remember what else. But to open up, people, I am admittedly, I'll put it on my wife, has string lights up. And we're not in the November, December, January period anymore. So this just opens up the ability for people to keep up their string lights and rope lights for a longer period of time.
That's great, especially with outdoor dining. That's almost a requirement. Thank you.
Under exemptions, architectural lighting of 40 watts incandescent equivalent or less. Since we're going to LEDs and CFLs, I guess should that language be more in lumens and not watts? I know it's a nit, but
I think we're still safe because in most cases, when you go and buy your LED lamp, and it may say 4.5 watt equivalent, so there's still an equivalency on the package. And here it does say equivalent of 40 watts incandescent or less.
Okay.
So I think time being, we're still safe until that changes on the packaging. And I'm not sure how you want to handle these. I forgot to ask if you wanted to have public input after each item or just me plow through all 15 and then have public input at the end.
I'd say plow through and we'll.
Yeah, if there's nothing else on number 1, I'll go to number 2. Screening of mechanical equipment. In the screening section, some mechanical equipment and other things such as large waste receptacles, loading service areas had to be screened in accordance with our section 14, which is our overall landscaping section and does have screening requirements in it. And it required screening for ground level mechanical units, but there was no definition for ground level. So as we delved into the subject, do we want to actually create a definition for what ground level means? Another option was to add wall-mounted equipment to that list as well. And then through that entire discussion, ended up proposing a pretty significant change to number 5, and I'm going to read that in the record. And again, this is an exemption, or screening shall be required for specific areas from both on-site and off-site views. Specific areas to be screened shall include, in number 5, is ground level. So ground level and wall-mounted mechanical equipment, that is air handling equipment, compressors, condensers, ductwork, transformers, and elevator equipment, visible from a public street, not including an alley, at ground level at the property line. So if I'm standing at the property line and I can see mechanical equipment, and I'm not on an alley, because we're going to give you a little bit of a bump for being on an alley. So if I can stand on the property line and see the mechanical equipment, then it must be screened. And the next sentence, window-mounted mechanical equipment, solar photovoltaic and solar thermal systems are exempted from the requirement to screen mechanical equipment. We have a lot of older houses, older buildings. There's a window air conditioner hanging out of the window. There's a little bit of leeway in that situation, as is there for solar photovoltaic and solar panels, thermal systems, in case people still have solar thermal systems up. Any questions on the screening requirement for those mechanical type equipment?
Maybe.
Well, this is, again, it's complaint driven, so you'd have to tattle on your neighbors. And people that already have this, are they considered non-conform? I mean, they're okay, they're grandfathered in, kind of like every satellite dish in the entire city that you can see is illegal, technically?
Pretty much, when this, if you have mechanical equipment that is already in existence and doesn't meet these rules or regulations, you're grandfathered. We didn't specifically write that in here, but we can certainly consider that as part of the requirement, or you can add that to your motion at that point if you feel it necessary. But we're not, this is not a retroactive thing. We have no intent of going around town and writing up all the folks for zoning violations.
So I'm trying to picture the 12 cubic feet. I mean, is that the typical size of an HVAC unit outdoors, or?
That was from the previous, so we've had that since 2017, and I presume that 12 cubic feet is probably bigger than your typical outdoor AC condenser. There's more on a commercial scale, so if it
Okay.
gets to be too big, and I really don't believe that 12 cubic feet is going to be the size of a typical condenser. And also, a lot of the residential condensers are getting smaller as the as the mini splits are becoming more popular.
Got it.
If there's nothing else there, we'll move on to number 3. Had a good bit of a conversation at the Planning Commission level about inoperable and abandoned motor vehicles. We currently have a prohibition in Section 12, which is off-street parking, about inoperable, unregistered, or abandoned vehicles to be stored outdoors. But there's no definition of inoperable in the zoning ordinance or of abandoned vehicle in the zoning ordinance. Part of that discussion, we ended up bringing forward the state definitions because that was just easier to do. So the 2 definitions that you have there are inoperable and abandoned come from the state. There was a modification proposed about inoperable. The state has a 30-day limitation. So that first one, as an example, inoperable motor vehicle means any one or more of the following: A, any motor vehicle which is not in operating condition for a period of 60 days or longer. I believe the state had 30. Planning Commission thought it would be nicer to give folks an extra 30 days before they're in violation or not in compliance with the zoning ordinance. So in each of the instances where it was 30 days, they are recommending 60 days. And the other part about Dr. Bradley educated me on what a tautology is. In other words, it's rather idiotic to say an inoperable vehicle is one that does not operate. But I had to convince him, and he's not convinced, and he's still sort of against this definition because of that. But it is the state definition, so I'm recommending the state definition be brought forward because it's just so much easier to, if there is ever a question, to fall back on the state definition. And then one other thing that was clarified in item D, the first section in red there, is that vehicles that are inoperable, unregistered, or abandoned must not be stored outdoors. Someone asked the question, well, what about John's Auto or any of the other automobile repair shops? So there was additional language put in that says, for the purposes of this section, an auto repair facility with a valid business license issued by the city is exempt from the prohibition of storing inoperable, unregistered, or abandoned vehicles outdoors. If they didn't have inoperable vehicles, they wouldn't be in business. Any questions?
No, but going back to David's comment on the first one, ground level units already were. On number 5, it originally read as ground level mechanical units were required to be screened. So there would be no need for a grandfathering. They've always been, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear all that.
On the
On
previous
5?
one, sorry. And number 5 originally read as ground level mechanical units. So they were already required to be screened. So we don't need grandfathering.
Right.
They've always been required, at least since the previous revision, and required to be screened if they're in the front, if you can see them from street level.
But the only potential issue is their ground level mechanical, we didn't really have a definition of that, and is elevator necessarily ground level? So we may have opened it up a little bit so that maybe not everything was under that original definition or intent.
Yeah. I think one of the main drivers was really the wall mounted on the front of a building.
There are no questions about inoperable or or abandoned. Go on to number 4, warehousing definition. We had in the C2 zoning district, there is the ability as a conditional use permit to do warehousing and distribution, but there's no definition again of warehousing or distribution. Going through a discussion of that, it was determined to take off the word the words and distribution. So in the use matrix, it just says warehousing. Conditional use permit remains, so there's no change in the requirement for the zoning. And then the definition is added that says warehousing, an operation from a structure or part of a structure for storing goods, wares, commodities, and merchandise, whether for the owner thereof or for others, and whether it is a public or private warehousing operation, but excluding mini warehouse. Mini warehouse is excluded. It has its own definition and its own place on the use matrix. And sorry, I have not been going through and telling you what the public comment was at the Planning Commission public hearing or what the Planning Commission recommendation was. But as an example, this one had no public comment and there was a unanimous recommendation for approval by Planning Commission. And I think that's been true, unanimous from the other items that I've covered so far. There's no question on that. Street banners. Street banner regulations, in the zoning ordinance, there's a section for signage, and within the signage ordinance or signage code, there are the street banner rules and regulations, and they're all included in your packet. Those aren't really signs, those are public events. And this is the program where you can have the banner put across the street. When I came here, we had 4 or 5 places around town. You go directly to Public Works for these. You don't come to the planning department. And it even says in item F2, no street banner shall be permitted with the main intent of commercial advertising or that displays business logos, business names, and it goes on. So we had a Supreme Court decision in Reed versus the town of Gilbert where we're really not supposed to have any content-based regulations in our signage. So staff's recommendation, and this is also, I don't want to speak for Jared, but he reviewed this and agreed that the best opportunity for us is just to remove this street banner section wholesale from the zoning text and put it in the streets and sidewalks chapter. Streets and sidewalks chapter is largely administered by Public Works anyway. They administer the street banner as it is, so it's easier just to place it there wholesale. Mainly because of the content-based restrictions that are in that section. And again, this has nothing to do with commercial advertising. It's not a sign per se.
Any questions from council?
And again, we have, at the Planning Commission public hearing, no public comment and a unanimous decision for that to be moved to the other chapter of the city code. If there are no further questions, number 6, remove the sunset provision, which we covered quickly at the beginning of this. There's really no need for that particular provision anymore since we're past the 2019 cutoff date for that sunset provision, or for those exemptions that were allowed for a shorter period of time. Any questions? And again, unanimous recommendation by Planning Commission. Number 7, short-term rental off-street parking, conditional use permit requirements. We do have short-term rentals in the R1, R2, RM, and RLC zoning districts and they may have the off-street parking requirement waived through a conditional use permit. There are 4 criteria currently that can be claimed for a waiver, and the third option allows the applicant to simply provide letters of support from the surrounding property owners. Staff does not believe that this is an appropriate criteria on its own for you to grant an approval for conditional use to waive or even reduce a parking requirement for a short-term rental. Property ownership changes and frequently and their impacts of the activity can extend beyond just the immediately adjacent properties. You see the existing language there on page 13 of your packet. Those are the 4 criteria currently. Going over to the next page, the recommendation is to fold that over. So fold over the idea of providing letters or a signed petition in support, fold that over into item B, and item B would read, the short-term rental is located in a residential historic district where streetscape would be marred by off-street parking, and there is support from adjacent property owners showing agreement to reduce or delete the requirement for off-street parking. And then there's still 2 other options for gaining a conditional use permit for reducing or waiving off-street parking requirement for a short-term rental. No public comment at the Planning Commission public hearing, and we do have a unanimous recommendation from the Planning Commission.
How many permits do we have now for reduced off-street parking for short-term?
1?
That's what I thought.
I believe we only had 1 request and 1 approval thus far, out of 26 or so that we have currently approved for short-term rentals. If there are no other questions, item number 8, we do have a requirement for site plans. Site plans are one of the few items, land use items that we have that do not have to be advertised in the newspaper, but we do have a requirement that a sign be posted on the property and adjacent property owner notices be put out. I'll just use the example of General's Retreat because that was our last site plan. I put really pretty yellow signs on 3 corners because it had street frontage on 3 sides. And then we've sent out the adjacent property notices to anybody immediately adjacent. And we don't consider streets, so we pretend like a street's not there. If you're across the street, you're adjacent. And then site plans also currently, since 2017, have to be posted to the website. It was just staff's request, and I think we've had maybe too much comment and consideration of this. It's really a minor request to remove that requirement for the site plans to be posted to the website. We're happy to continue it. It's no issue there. My worry was that, one, if we forgot to, then the applicant would have to start the process over, a procedural due process issue. But we've since the Planning Commission meeting have had some advisement that that's not a procedural due process issue. If it's not timely posted, then that does not mean that an applicant has to start the process over. So it'd be up to you if you would like for the site plans to continue to be posted to the website as a requirement, or them not be posted anymore as a requirement, but we could still do it as a best management or as a procedural item, just and continue to do it. So again, this is a minor request, more from staff, just because it's an extra step that we don't do for any of the other land use items. This is the only one that came through as part of the update, where I believe it's a holdover from a site plan from a particular property that caused a lot of issues a good bit in the past.
Arnie, are all the site plans, are they in the agendas and packets that are posted online?
Once the packet for planning commission, because site plans only go to planning commission, so as part of the agenda packet, yes, it's part of that.
So it would be online, I mean, with the packet, but maybe not 2 weeks.
Correct.
Or a month.
It would be 1 week before
Or
as
1
opposed to 10 days or more.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the other thing, just like any other application, land use application, if you see that pretty yellow sign, just call our department, phone number's on there. We can email you all the information, just like we do for variance requests and everything else. So we do have ways of disseminating the information. It's just this one in particular has a requirement that the others don't. But again, we're happy to continue if you prefer to be continued.
Arnie, this may be a minor point, but in the language of this, it says property as determined by the city's real property tax records. I happen to live on the border of Rockbridge County, so 2 of my neighbors are in Rockbridge County. Are we giving any notice to, you know, in that situation, are we also giving notice to neighbors in the county?
We are. And there's another requirement that's not in here, I think, that says if we're in, I can't remember if it's a half a mile of the jurisdiction, then we send something to their planning department as well, just to make them aware that a land use item is being considered within a half a mile of the boundary. Yes.
Just from one perspective, so many things that when people ask about, we say it's on the website. It's on the website. You want to know that? It's on the website. And so here's a situation where we go to the trouble of putting it in an advertisement in the newspaper. We put a physical advertisement on the property, the whole 9 yards. And then when they say, boy, I'd love to know more about that, it's the one thing that is not on the website. So I could see some folks saying, gosh, you've trained me to look on the website for every other darn thing, and this is the one that is not on the website. I'm glad that it's not a procedural problem that would set back the application. It might be a best practice to strive to put it on the website, just from my perspective, but when we get to it, everyone else can maybe shoot me down on that.
Arnie, I'm sure it's in here and I hadn't been able to glean it, but what is our stated process for that notification? Is it knocking on a door? Is it mailing to the landowner if it's a rental? Or how is that notification completed?
From the land records, which we use the GIS because the land records go quarterly into the GIS. So we'll look at the GIS map. We'll look at all the adjacents and send it to whoever is listed there as the mailing or the mailed to address. So
Okay.
if it's a property owner who's out of town, we mail it to that address.
Terrific.
So the
Thank you.
tenant probably won't see it, but the tenant, if they're paying attention, will see the pretty yellow sign.
Sign. Perfect. Thank you.
And there was a vote of 4-2, so there was not unanimity there. Unless there are any questions, and next item is item 9, RM and RLC zoning districts. The RM and RLC zoning districts have a 40-foot minimum rear yard setback requirements for multifamily structures. And you see that highlighted in your lot requirements table. This is more restrictive than any of the other setback requirements. And the request is to consider reducing that 40-foot rear yard setback for RM and RLC, specifically for multifamily. There was one particular property off of McLaughlin Street where that was hindering the amount of development that could occur there. And that had a lot to do with just the really odd shape of that particular property. So that's sort of the impetus to start this discussion. And then there was a recommendation from is a recommendation from Planning Commission to reduce that to 30 feet. Okay, no questions going on item number 10. Multifamily dwellings permitted and conditional. Currently in the C1 zoning district, dwelling units are permitted by right on the second floor and higher and are conditional on the first floor. But that's not reflected in the use matrix. So you see in that first table there's just a by right and a conditional for multifamily dwellings in RM and then RLC. But it does not say anything, or it does not list anything for the C1 zoning district. So that's a fairly simple housekeeping item. And as you see at the bottom, where B would be, and with the notation 1, a by right on the second floor and higher, and a conditional for the first floor. Any questions on that particular item? Again, that's a little bit more housekeeping. The second one is a little bit more philosophical in that as we were having requests for, or intent to purchase and having proposals for the VDOT property, and then also thinking about the property that's directly behind Sheets, that we've had someone consider that for townhouses. And those are two C2 zoned properties where the multifamily dwelling would not be by right in C2. So my question to the Planning Commission was, would you want to make that by right so you wouldn't have to make a developer necessarily go through that public hearing process? And so there was discussion, and it's even included here during the Planning Commission public hearing, a recommendation, or not, the language is included in such a way that it would be by right as a suggestion. But after going through and thinking perhaps a little bit more over the last few months, is that strategically the best maneuver for the city? Because you do have control when the developer has to come to you for a rezoning. So I'm going to go ahead and pull back, not my recommendation, or at least my initial thought that maybe it should be by right. Because if someone has to come before you specifically during a rezoning, then they can offer proffers. You know, you can't really negotiate proffers, but they can at least offer proffers. And if they're smart and they're looking at the comprehensive plan and they see that we need, as an example, of additional walkways or sidewalks, they may proffer a 5-foot sidewalk in front of their property as they're developing their apartment complex, as an example. So it may be strategically beneficial for you not to make multifamily units in the C2 by right and leave it as a rezoning, so they would have to rezone to residential multifamily. So that's just a consideration for you, where I think I started us down a road, and then thinking about it a little bit more as we were going through the process, maybe you don't want to do a by right and have a little bit more control. The developer may not be as amenable to that, because then they have to go through the vagaries of a public hearing process, which they never like. But at least there's that opportunity to talk about conditions.
Members of council have any questions or observations?
It just to say that Planning Commission agreed with Arnie's revised recommendation, so we did not change the C2 to by right and left it as it was. You'd have to rezone it.
Okay, moving on to number 11, Parks and Open Space Zoning District. We currently do not have any mention of parks and open space on the lot requirements table, so there's not a minimum acreage, there's not a minimum area, building height, or setback. There was a request for RARO to come forward because they needed to have a shed for their new mower for the annex that was on the backside of Brubaker. And there was already a batting cage sort of area that had pavement, and they thought they'd put it into the pavement, but that was right on the property line, or very, very close to the property line. So I said, wait, I have to find out what the setbacks are for parks and open space, and come to find out we don't have any. So I thought maybe we should have a minimum setback requirement, and I have to point out that most of, if not all of Parks and Open Space property is city property, with the exception of a little bit out on a couple of the holes of the golf course that happen to be in the city of Lexington. So we are talking city property by and large when we're talking about parks and open space. So there is a recommendation for a 5-foot front yard, side yard, and rear yard setback, and a height requirement of between 0 feet of the property line and 5 feet, and between 5 feet and 9.99 feet, you have a 15-foot height maximum, and then once you got to 10 feet or more, 35 feet. And that 35 feet is the same that folks would have in adjacent residential zoning districts as far as a maximum height. It was also brought up during that discussion that we have a cemetery master plan, and in that cemetery master plan, there is a proposal to have niche walls and other structures on the property line. So you do see an exemption there, or a note that says structures located in designated cemeteries and designed to contain human remains such as but not limited to mausoleums, columbaria, crypts, and niche walls, are not subject to the Parks and Open Space yard setback regulations. Any questions there?
No, sir.
I keep forgetting and that was unanimous by Planning Commission as a recommendation. Number 12, recreational vehicle parking. There's a clarification. In the current language, it's just unclear to me. The restrictions prohibit RVs from parking in the front yard while allowing temporary RV parking in all yards for loading and unloading, but it's just not clear if you can park an RV in the side or rear yards for a period beyond that temporary 24 hours. So it was a request on my part for just a clarification on can an RV be parked in a side or rear yard for more than the 24 hours. The recommendation there from Planning Commission is to change it so that, yes, you can park an RV in the side and rear yard for a period exceeding 48 hours. And that's the intent of that language that you see. And they also decided to increase that period of time of loading and unloading from 24 hours to 48 hours. Somebody said it was 24 hours wasn't long enough to hose out your Jeep or your RV after a long vacation.
That was an interesting discussion because I watched it and had a question about almost what is an RV. I mean, you think about the large, where you maybe almost like the size of a bus or a Sprinter van. Is that an RV?
I will read the RV definition to you in just a moment. Recreational vehicle, a vehicle which is 1, built on a single chassis, 2, 400 square feet or less when measured at the largest horizontal projection, 3, designed to be self-propelled or permanently towable by a light-duty truck, and 4, designed primarily not for the use as a permanent dwelling, but as a temporary living quarters for recreational, camping, travel, or seasonal use.
Question for you. I'm aware of an individual who parks a food truck in front of their house for months at a time, and with a lot of signage and advertising on it. And I know that that particular resident's neighbors are unhappy with that situation, and it would seem to me that a restriction like this could answer that particular problem, but the way we've defined recreational vehicle would not. And to me, that seems to be a bigger problem than recreational vehicle. So I'm just wondering if we might consider expanding the idea of objectionable vehicles.
And we could certainly do that. This is specifically to clarify recreational vehicle only. We also had a separate discussion about commercial vehicles, and then had a discussion about class 4s versus class 5s and what should be or shouldn't be. And Planning Commission came to the recommendation at that time to not go forward, to not be as restrictive with commercial vehicles. Now, if you direct us in the next annual update that you would like for there to be regulations proposed for commercial vehicles, we could certainly look into that again and more in depth.
So someone that might be a long haul trucker that comes back home and they're home for a few days and they park their rig, not the trailer, but the is that considered an RV? Like if they try to park that in their front yard for several days, I mean, they can sleep in it and it's got the cab, the whole 9 yards. It's
I don't think so, because that would be the commercial side of it.
Understood.
And not,
Okay.
I think that would be, what's the primary intent of that is the commercial and not the RV portion.
understood. Okay.
And you might consider directing Planning Commission to look at that, because we did have that discussion, that there was an inconsistency. You're regulating RVs, but not the commercial vehicles, even, huge ones. Their feeling was they hadn't heard enough complaints about commercial vehicles, and you hate to hurt someone's livelihood. But, it could be similar to the RV. You just have to put it on the side of your house or not right in front where it blocks your house? Because I have heard several complaints, not
Right.
about food trucks, but about large dump trucks and,
So have we heard complaints about RVs? I mean, is that a common refrain?
Complaints from
From-
community
from-
members about the RV?
From residents who are complaining that their neighbors are parking their RVs in front of their house?
I've had actually two questions about RVs, and the question was more about living in them, not where they were parked. And again, the impetus of this was to clarify the language that wasn't clear to me, because it only says you can't park in the front, and for a period of time you can park all over, but that doesn't tell me what can I do permanently or longer term in the side and rear. So that's where this discussion started. And then we did have a separate discussion about commercial vehicles, but the recommendation at this time was not to move forward. But again, if the Planning Commission is directed to during the next update, we can take a longer look at commercial vehicles. Bed and breakfasts, number 13, there was a request to increase the number of rooms allowed in a bed and breakfast from 5 to 8. Currently, the definition says a dwelling unit occupied by owner that provides for up to 5 bedroom accommodations, and the request is to go to 8. Perhaps the comforting factor here are the use and design standards that you already have in 420-11.3 for commercial uses in subsection 2 specifically for bed and breakfast. So even if they have enough space in the building for additional beds, they still have to meet all of the other requirements that you see listed on the bottom of page 23 and going on over to page 24, such as off-street parking, as an example. So it's not just you can put more beds in, no problem. It still has to meet all the use and design standards. And I think Planning Commission was comfortable with the number specifically because there are a number of use and design standards that would have to be met. And they're also limited. I'm just now looking at P and Q in particular. Bed and breakfast only in R1 along Main, Washington, and Nelson Streets, and in R2 along South Main Street. So there's not that much ability in the city to do a bed and breakfast, except for along those roadways that I just read, and by conditional use permit. If there are any questions, going on over to the C2 zoning district wall sign size, there was a request to increase the C2. And C2 is the commercial district heading out East Nelson, Sheets all the way up to the pawn shop, that area. And then on the other side of town, heading out South Main, where we have, not Tractor Supply, we have the co-op, thank you, and that commercial area out that way. So if you think of more of our suburban type commercial zoning district, we have a current wall sign maximum of 25 square feet, and the consideration was to go to something larger than that. So reading down from the bottom of page 25, that in no case shall any business display greater than 100 square feet of signage per building street frontage, and that leads to this more specific calculation for a wall sign in a C2 zoning district, which would go from 25 square feet flat, just one 25 square foot sign, and that's it. And that would apply currently to the smoothie shop, which is a horrible example because they're no longer there. But just think of that small storefront, 25 square feet, and it also applies to Schul's, even though they have a much bigger building front. So the idea is to go from that 25 square foot flat to a 1 square foot for each lineal foot of building frontage, with a 32 square foot minimum size and a 100 square foot maximum allowed. So if you had 1 square foot per lineal foot and you only had a 20 foot wide storefront, you could at least get 32 square feet. But if you had a 500 foot long building, you're not going to get a 500 square foot sign. You're going to be limited to 100 square feet. So that's what the recommendation is from Planning Commission, and that was unanimous.
Along as you mentioned, the Schul's, do you recall the size of the sign that they have?
it's at 90 point something, or it's in the 90, it's not 100 square feet, it's in 9, oh, and actually that's a good point in that we had those questions at Planning Commission, so we did, Kate put together a few photographs, and with the captions, do we have the actual signs?
Is it part of our package, you're thinking?
On page 39, the frontage of Schul's is 140 feet and the approved sign is 90.84. So we do have several photographs here just to show you some of the entrance quarter certificates of appropriateness for wall signs that have been approved by Planning Commission in the last few years, just to give you a sense of size and scale of building and size of sign on storefront.
Good work. That's very helpful. Seeing is believing. Any questions from council? And item 15.
Item 15, home occupation limitations. We have had a couple of instances for home occupations where it's the second or third in a particular dwelling unit, and there's no limitation on the number, and there's no limitation on how much really of the area that can be used in a residence for a home occupation. It was decided not to limit the number of home occupations, but to change the requirement that's currently, it says that you can use no more than 25% of your area for, the area devoted to home occupation shall not exceed 25% of the gross floor area of the dwelling unit. The reason you want to limit it is you don't want it to turn into a commercial enterprise. You want it to be a residence that happens to have a small component that's commercial. To change that to the area devoted to home occupations shall not exceed 25% of the gross floor area of the dwelling unit. So if you had one, that can't exceed 25% of the floor area. If you had 3 home occupations, they in total cannot exceed 25% of the floor area. So you're still trying to minimize, regardless of how many home occupations you have, minimize the impact that they have so that they don't aggregately cause an issue in a residential district. And that was unanimous also by Planning Commission as a recommendation.
Certainly don't want an office building in a residential area.
All right.
Okay.
You don't want it to get that way over time incrementally by home occupation after home occupation after home
Right.
occupation.
Thank you, Arnie. Members of council have any questions? If not, I would like to open the public hearing and see if there's anyone who would like to speak to these zoning ordinance amendments that have been reviewed by Arnie. It's currently 8:07. Anyone wish to speak to this? Ms. Johnson, you want to speak to these in particular? If you could state your name and address for the record, please.
Mays Johnson, 411 North Randolph Street, Lexington. Oh, okay, I know where I'm at. I just didn't understand, what was it, Donald? The information for the RV parking at your home? I'm sorry, I had to move up because when I've been here doing meetings, sitting behind the speaker, I can't hear. Maybe it's my hearing, but it'd be nice if you could speak and the voice project. So, but I hate to have you repeat it before it's voted on. I just wanted to hear what was the rule, what was the
Sure.
correction that you made. Where was the RV going to be?
The RV regulations currently say that you cannot park in the front yard and you can park anywhere on the property for a period of 24 hours, so for loading and unloading. But that doesn't tell me if it's allowed, if somebody has an RV in the side yard or rear yard for longer than 24 hours at a time. So we needed to have a clarification, and we do have a clarification in the proposal where you can park in your front yard for up to 48 hours, and that you can park an RV in the side yard or rear yard for an extended period of time.
Thank you. I was getting RV, I was like, wait a minute, where am I going to park if I can't park it in my yard?
Right.
Thank you. Okay. Well, that was all for this, what you all speaking up. I had something else.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to, specifically to the text amendments of the zoning ordinance? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing at 8:09 and ask for council's consideration.
I move to approve ordinance 2021-05, a zoning ordinance amendment to update 15 sections of the zoning ordinance as presented.
A second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
So there's not a desire to ask that site plans be put on the website?
They are currently required to be put on the website.
And we would be removing that requirement?
No, it'd end up staying the same.
If you do it as presented, that means that we're removing, because that's how it was presented. So if
Right.
you want
Oh,
the
that's right.
clarification,
Sorry,
I
yeah.
would definitely make the clarification, either amend the motion or approve that and then go back and amend it.
Oh, that's right, I'm sorry, yeah.
And I would be fine to say that it's advised that they be put on the website. I mean, I just think that we should strive to do it. I understand things happen and it might not get on there, but if I just think it's our best practice. So I would like to ask to maybe amend the motion to add language that we
Require.
require,
Yeah.
or a softer word that.
It would be striking that amendment altogether then, right?
Arnie, can you offer some language? David, you're asking for it to be
Yes.
as a best practice? Or
I just think it should be on the website, but I don't want to box in our planning commissioner if it's been a crazy week, and you know what? It doesn't get put on the website, and somebody in the city comes up and just wants to say you violated city code.
Well, arguably, dealing with this specifically, I don't know, but a question, does state code requires notification, which is in the paper. So we've gone an extra step and put it on, and made a requirement to put it on our website. And clearly the issue can become, if it doesn't get on in the right timing with the advertisement in the paper, it's not required by the state, but it certainly is a best practice. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're looking to amend it from accept what's coming, but add to it as a best practice to include it on the website.
Well, right now, it is being recommended to remove the requirement. Currently, it is required.
Correct.
And we're saying it is no longer required.
Correct.
And I would prefer if we have to say that it's still required, then I would like to remove that line. But I would just like that we have trained our citizens to look on the internet, and that's what they expect it to be.
And obviously, technology is the future. Let me grab Jared.
I was just going to say the issue is currently required by the city code. Taking that out puts it into a policy, best practice of the policy, and that seems to cover the city in terms of what's required, and then the policy isn't necessarily enforceable. But it is sort of our best practice is to do this. Whereas if it's required by city code, it's required by city code. But the way it's written now, there's no, in contrast to the mailing the notices within 10 days of the hearing, the way it's written now, it's a pretty loose requirement. It just says it shall be posted to the website. It doesn't say when, it doesn't say how, it could be after the hearing. So if the goal is to make it the city's policy that these things are going to be posted to the website, I think we can do that through policy. I don't think we have to do that as a requirement under the city code. And again, as Arnie pointed out, this is the only thing sort of in this ambit that is required to be posted by the city code. So it is a little bit of an outlier in that sense.
Could I offer perhaps an amendment that says the site plans shall or should be posted to the city website? Instead of shall, the should then makes it basically a best management practice for us to do it, and we will continue to do it.
Yeah, I don't mean to hold this up. It's just my intent that, that we don't have less information available to the citizens, that we strive to have all of it, more of it, all the time. That's just my goal. I'm sorry to, like best practice. And
So would you be okay with removing the requirement? I mean, I think our options are either remove the requirement, but we will still do it as a best practice, and that was the original proposal, which I think from what Jared said, it makes more sense. I don't think we should put our policies into city code, which I'd be
That's a
all
good
for,
explanation.
which I'd be all for that amendment.
That's a good explanation.
Okay.
That then we should have a policy that site plans are put on the website. That's what we should do, and then we can go ahead and accept the recommendation as presented to remove the requirement from city code that site plans are posted, and then we would have a policy that they will be posted. This will be great for people to listen to later and.
Any further discussion? Have a motion, a second. David?
Can I get more clarification on my HVAC unit that's outside my house that from the front of my property you cannot see, but if you go down and stand in front of my neighbor's house and look diagonally, you can see outdoor mechanical, et cetera, at my house. Am I not in compliance or am I compliant?
You're in compliance because it's an existing unit, but if you were to build your house new, you would have to at least put a shrub or a little screening section of fence in. We would hopefully catch that during the building permit process, and because there's no site plans for residential, some one family or two family.
And so that it is clear that everyone's grandfathered in, and we won't have people going around the city taking pictures of people's houses and then keep bringing them and showing violations?
Correct.
Okay.
Can't promise you that, but Chuck?
How about for a house currently under construction that already has a mechanical unit out front, but the permit has not been closed out yet? So the CO hasn't been
But the
issued.
review, I would say that the review and approval of that permit to go forward with construction has already been approved under the existing rules and regulations. So the rule hasn't been put into place while they were going through review.
Okay, thanks.
Have a motion, a second, and I'd ask for a roll call vote.
Wait, now I want to make sure where we stand on, so I made a motion to accept the ordinance as presented, and it was presented that we remove, okay, even though that wasn't Planning Commission's recommendation. So we are okay with the motion as it stands. It will remove the requirement for that to be posted on the website. Is that right? Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Want to get it right, without a doubt. And it was a significant amount of information, and going forward, we may want to have a work session to get into the nuts and bolts of it, but this is terrific. Ask for a roll call vote. Ms. Strawn?
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler?
Aye.
Mr. Alligood?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Ms. Alexander?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Arnie, please take our thanks back to the Planning Commission for sorting through those. And personally, I'd carried forward the increasing the number for bed and breakfast. I think to have more people visiting and being able to stay in our community is a terrific thing, and especially with the criteria situated with that. So thank you. Ms. Johnson, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Did I miss
Public comment?
commenting on bed and breakfast? Did y'all just vote on everything that he was speaking
We just
of?
voted on everything. But if you'd like to offer your comments, we're still here and we can,
Well, that's one of my things I wanted to address council is the number of bed and breakfasts that's opening up illegally in Lexington. Whether they're bed and breakfasts are called short-term rentals, I just don't know. But I know I have half the United States parking on my street, and it is a bed and breakfast. And most people that are purchasing the homes are usually in black neighborhoods. They're affluent white people. They don't live in Lexington. They usually affiliate with W&L or VMI, mostly VMI, and they're renting out their homes. And I just, that needs to be looked at.
very good. Thank you, ma'am. Are there any other items from the zoning amendments that you wanted to address? Or was it just the RV and the bed and breakfast?
Well, the bed and breakfast is and staying there in the wrong zone. They're not.
Bed and breakfast is not authorized on your street. You're exactly right.
Right, so they're not following procedures.
Right.
I mean, you all spoke of bed and breakfast mostly on Main Street, Washington, Nelson Street, and South Main.
If there are folks that are operating bed and breakfast on your street, if the city manager can follow up with you, we've got your address, or if he can follow up and call you to get further details and investigate that situation. We'd be glad to do that because a bed and breakfast is not authorized on Randolph Street.
It's only Randolph. It's in black neighborhoods, period.
Sure.
And to add on, short-term rentals would not be allowed either unless people live there and it is their primary residence. And then they do have some rights to do some short-term rental. But if it's bought as their second home, they can't just run a side business as a short-term rental. And you can call City Hall and City Hall will look at it because you're correct. I am aware of some families affiliated with the schools or not affiliated with the schools that have done that, and the city has reached out to them and said you cannot do it, and they've stopped. If people are starting to do it again, please reach out to the city because you're exactly right. There are things that should not be happening. You're right.
You can call Jim at 462-3700 and give him the details of where those acts are taking place. But Ms. Johnson, while I have you, are there any other items of the zoning that were of concern that you wanted to speak to tonight? There were the 15 items. If we've hit the two that were important to you, that's fine. I just didn't want you to, didn't want to rush you.
No, I know, I didn't, they told me I was up here the first time. But no, that
No
was
problem.
one of the 4 topics.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. What City Council just approved with the zoning amendment applies to bed and breakfast, which can only be on Main and the other streets that are indicated. So your issue that you raise is a different topic, and we'll get the city manager on that. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for being here and raising the issue. Next item on the agenda is consideration of the minutes. You had your June 17 work session and regular council meeting. And unless there's an objection to approving them as presented, we will do so. And I hear no objection. Next item is citizens' remarks and comments. And Ms. Johnson was the only person I had sign up. Ms. Johnson, are there any other topics that you wanted to speak to this evening? If so, please come up and turn on that microphone.
Yes, I do. I'm from here. I grew up here. My parents built our home on Randolph Street. It was called something else. I can't remember right now. But I see where in May 19th paper, out of the old past, there was this thing. It was a comment made about VMI buying up Diamond Hill. And I have been looking and observing, I've just been quiet for quite a while, but now it's really getting to me, that my neighborhood is disappearing. I believe in diversity. I mean, I really truly do. But my black neighborhood is disappearing. And it doesn't sit well with me. And I say to myself, don't we have some historic value in the city of Lexington? I mean, our neighborhoods were hard to get. I mean, a lot of people, our families weren't able to buy across town. They were put over in Diamond Hill section. And it's just like everything's being consumed mostly by VMI. I go down Perry Lane. I have family down there too. And my heritage is gone. I mean, just what's the city going to do to preserve some of the black neighborhoods? I'm just baffled by it. I want to say it angers me. I can ride up North Randolph and say this used to be the Greenhouse and the Wilsons and whatever, and this over here was one of the prominent black teachers in Lexington, Miss Gilmore, and so. Now I look and I'm like, God, where did everything go? You know, what is Lexington doing to retain black people here? You know, you don't offer good jobs here, paying jobs. Really, truly, you don't. They're hard to get. If you get one, you're lucky. And that infuriates me. It's just, I just see us, how much are we disappearing from the city of Lexington? I probably can count black people on my hands and toes that I know of. Nobody's coming back home to live here. Why? Because we don't offer them any way, a good way to live, a good salary to live on. No way. And I just don't know what's going to happen with the race here, with our race here. And like I said, I mean, everybody has the right to prosper and stuff. But it just gets me that every time there's economic development, the black neighborhoods are hit. Black people are hit. It just discourages me everywhere. I worked in Roanoke for 26, I lived in Roanoke 26 years. I retired from the city of Roanoke. And the people that I met there, they would take me and show me economic development. And I had a friend tell me, we were walking, I thought she was taking me into the Civic Center. And we stopped. And I said, what are you stopping for? She said, this is where I used to live. It floored me. I was in the parking lot. That's economic development, to take someone's house to put up a parking lot? You're gonna take someone's home to put in a swimming pool? I just did not get it. It truly hurts. And then I found out too, which I've known for a while, I just haven't addressed it, down in the older building, that's where I went to school. I started there, first grade. When you walk through those first doors, that was Miss Burnett's and Miss Truesdale's room, first and second grade. And then I found out there is a historical room downstairs for black people. I mean, not to say black people, but for our heritage, whatever. It's locked, isn't it? Who mans it? How do you get to go see it? If I have friends and relatives come here and I tell them about them, I got to go chase down the key somewhere. But yet I can go all uptown to the historical uptown and open up any door that I want to and go in. I'm upset. But I'm embarrassed sometimes. And I'm glad things have changed coming into Lexington with the signage. Because people have asked me, you all have that here? And I'm going, yeah, but that's part of us. I mean, it's part of the United States. I accept it. But it seems like we're lacking a whole lot. And I go out to the cemetery, and they have put up 2 new cinder block things. It doesn't look any wider than what it was. Our vehicles and hearses and everything else still going to be able to make that turn to get into Evergreen Cemetery? It doesn't look like it. I don't turn my Jeep the right way. It looks like I'm going to run into the walls. How are we going to expand Evergreen? That's a lot of questions that I have in my head. Maybe I'll address another day, but thank you for listening.
Ms. Johnson, thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts and feelings with us. And there is unequivocally a great deal of progress yet to be made and opportunities for our community to become more of the community that you remember and personally that I remember from growing up here in the 70s and 80s. It's different, to be sure, and part of our job with zoning, with working to attract or provide more housing and opportunities for folks to be able to come back and have the Lexington community that you and I know and love. And again, thank you for being here and sharing your thoughts. Is there anyone else from the public? Mr. Grigsby. If you can turn on the microphone so we can record you.
Yep, there we go.
Thank
Are you
you.
sure you want to? No, that's Ben Grigsby, 111 Lee Avenue, and I'm thrilled to be here for your second in-person meeting. To the great relief of some, I promise not to make it a habit of perfect attendance. But I'm here tonight really on the agenda to celebrate what I hope is the affirmation of the sale of the Piavana building. You all will know that this has been a great source of sensitivity and importance to me, and among a very, very large swath of our Lex Rock community. So I'm thrilled that's happened. I understand that we're very close and may be in a position to vote. And I just want to sit down and say thanks to everybody on that. The second point in the same 10.1 to 10.2 on the agenda addresses the residual of Spotswood. And I just wanted to share a couple of comments to the last city council meeting 2 weeks ago. I beseeched council to be very methodical about reopening that process. I've had a conversation that was a very productive one from my point of view with the city manager on Tuesday this week, delayed a little bit because I had a couple of issues. But equally in the 10.2, some of the comments I'm a little concerned really don't address the fullness of where we are in this. City manager correctly says he'd like guidance from council. I'm here to ask you to provide this kind of guidance. A little bit of history. Obviously, Echelon first came to the city in August a year ago. It became the possible development of the fullness of the Spotswood property hit the public airways properly February-ish. I think it was the 4th March board meeting, council meeting that really launched it. That's when a number of other proposals came to the table, including my own, which I'll be very happy to withdraw it once the contract is signed. Otherwise, I'll roll it again just to have you, so you all have a backup. But that process then was put on the shelf. Correct, as it turns out to be allow correct and fulsome process to negotiate with RARA for the Piavana building. That reopened basically 2.5, 3 weeks ago. And it was at the last city council meeting where I noted that only 2 of the proposers had been contacted by the city to be formally notified. If you didn't do a really damn close reading of the minutes, you wouldn't have known. And one of those Macs had only gotten notified on the Wednesday before the Thursday meeting. The deadline that you've set of the end of this month, to me, is absolutely too short. It just doesn't make sense for a whole variety of reasons. It's not the 6 months that people have been working on it. Everybody, when you took it off the table, mothballed the project. They've got other things to do. They weren't going to go start something unless they knew what the potential outcome was going to be. It's now had a couple of weeks, and I think that it's really in the best interest of the city that we have a proper RFP, as I've said before. You all put down some basic parameters of what you think you want out of this property, residential, mixed use, anything, just give people some guidance, but they need to have a proper time frame to get something that's more than the cursory proposals they had last time that inevitably and predictably were thin on detail. You didn't have the information to make a proper assessment. So I really think you need to defer this until a minimum of the 15th of September, potentially the 1st of October. We're in the holiday season. Circumstances have changed. The supply chain's changed. Cost basis for construction has changed. Every single element of development has changed. And if you really want to get a quality project out of this, and I don't care who wins, as long as it's a really well thoughtfully presented, fully competitive project, I think that is the challenge that you need to do and provide that guidance to the city manager and others who are going to be involved, and particularly the proposers, so that they can give a quality job and you can make a quality assessment. I'm not a developer. I'm not going to be making an independent proposal, but I am an investor. I've talked to the 3, to Max, I've talked to the Adamsons, and I've talked to the Schweitzers, and I will be working in collaboration with them as they would like. And if somebody else comes up, I'll be happy to work with them too as a potential investor in projects to really get a high quality outcome in the town. So that's my plea. I hope you will take that and give it really thoughtful consideration, because I guarantee you on, pick a day, Thanksgiving, you're not going to care if you close the book on the 31st of July or the 31st of September would be interesting. The 30th of September, you're not going to care. You're going to have a better project. So that's my plea. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grigsby. Appreciate your insights and participation in the city's work. Thank you. Mr. Ellisted, if you would be so kind as to state your name and address for the record, please. It's great to see you at a city council meeting.
Mr. Mayor, good to see you again. My name's John Ellisted, 412 Confederate Circle, Lexington. I know the agenda was put out last week and there was no time to put anything on the agenda. I just have a question, Mr. Mayor. Were you going to comment on your comments about the event we went to this afternoon?
Yes.
Okay, if that's the case, I will sit down and won't waste your time.
Very good. Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak to council this evening? Hearing none, we'll move on to the agenda. The next item is consent agenda. There is item 9.1 and 9.2 for council's consideration.
I move to approve the consent agenda. I can't.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Thank you all very much. Roll call vote. Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Ayers.
Aye.
Mr. Alligood.
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler.
Aye.
Ms. Strawn.
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Hope they have a great 4th of July celebration, and interested to see how much furniture Washington Lee unloads. Next item on the agenda is unfinished business, and I would call on the city manager for consideration of an agreement for sale of the Piovano building to RaRa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. As it notes on the agenda, this item was originally a placeholder because we did not have an agreement that had been before us, crafted by the city attorney and the attorney for RaRa. We have since received that agreement, and I've also received word today, just after 2 o'clock, that the RaRa board did unanimously agree to accept this. So if you desire, you are free to consider it this evening. I would, of course, recommend that we put this to bed as quickly as possible for some of the same reasons as noted by Mr. Grigsby. The whole community is looking forward to having this finalized and moving on to other business. I guess that's all I have to say. If you have questions about the agreement itself, of course, Mr. Jenkins, our attorney, could answer those questions for you. I would note one other thing, and I'll touch on that in 10.2, is that we do have to have a survey done, and again, I'll touch on that more on that second item, if that pleases council.
Jared, relative to looking at the contract is separate and distinct from a public hearing that we would have later for the physical transfer. Is that correct?
Correct. Tonight, under consideration and for a vote is basically the language of the contract. So on approval tonight, the only thing you're binding yourselves to is this is the language of the contract that will be presented to the public, a public hearing and an ordinance hearing on the 15th, presumably. Notice in the paper, that kind of thing, will be the substantive vote of actually approving the sale, authorizing the city manager to sign this contract. Tonight is just simply a way to make sure that we're not trying to hit a moving target when we do vote on an ordinance, that this is the language that will be voted on subsequently at a later meeting.
Given that instruction, I would ask for council's consideration.
I actually have a few questions for Jared first. Would that be okay?
I'd prefer to have them as part of the discussion afterwards. If nobody wants to make a motion to approve it, then we don't have anything to discuss.
I move to approve the RaRa contract as presented.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Now, discussion, Dennis, if you could fire away.
Yeah, thanks. First off, thanks for all your work on this, Jared. I'm really excited about it. There are just a few things in here that I did have questions about. Under contingencies and conditions, item 1, in exchange for such use, seller agrees to keep the grassy area trimmed and the building plowed and salted, would that create sort of a liability for the city moving forward on this property as long as we did that? I'm just trying to figure out how that would work.
I mean, no more than anywhere else, and certainly the city would be within its rights. I mean, RARA would have to keep whatever area they want to be maintained clear and free of obstructions. But, you know, that was ultimately part of the agreement, was in exchange for the electoral board's use, sort of free and clear, that the city would maintain the property.
Right, I'm just worried that, you know, all the other times it's not, you know, used for an election, shoveling the snow in front of that building, is that suddenly the city's responsibility moving forward? Because the way it's written here, it makes it seem like it is.
And it is. So mowing grass is, the maintenance is not tied to accessibility for the election.
Right.
So Dennis, just to be clear, what we're agreeing to is city staff that now pushes snow and mows the grass will continue to do that for a minimum of the next 5 years.
As long as we're using it for
Correct.
elections.
Correct. If elections in 2 years from now moved, explicitly it would terminate the city service of mowing and pushing snow.
Right.
Contractually.
Okay. Second one is also on contingencies and conditions, number 4. The seller agrees that the existing marked parking spaces will be sufficient to meet any and all parking-related zoning requirements. I mean, I can understand how that would be the case with the current use, but is this saying that we agree to waive any parking requirements regardless of how this property is used?
Essentially, yes.
Okay, that's maybe a problem. I mean, I'm not sure that I would be comfortable waiving in perpetuity any parking requirements regardless of how this property is used. That's the issue. Not that there's a problem with how it's used now, but
So you're just saying the requirements are waived as so long as RARA is the main tenant of the, of the building? Should someday they dispose of it and someone else
wants to do something that's
Right.
more intensive, we're not.
And so would that be, though, potentially, so as long, but that would be a separate contract. This is the purchase contract to sell it to RARA. One would think that a future contract between RARA and someone else, they wouldn't get to attach this language.
Well, I'm just wondering why we have
You're the
4
lawyer.
in there at all. Is there a way to take that out?
Well, sure, we could just strike that language in the motion, revise the motion to
Okay.
approve the contract, striking that language.
Okay. That would be a recommendation from me to do that. And finally, just minor thing, the range hood, is there an estimated cost for this?
I think the ballpark was between $3,500 and $4,500,
Got it.
depending on what happens when the contractor gets in there and sees exactly what they're dealing with.
Okay, I'm just wondering if it might be easier to reduce the purchase price by that, you know, once we have an estimate and then let them worry about that and.
We offered that as an option to
Okay.
knock off $4,500 off the purchase price, and they said,
Okay.
we prefer you guys just take care of it.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So number 4 does not convey if they sell the property, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So, and just to get my wheels spinning, the theoretical circumstance, as long as RARA is in this building and operating it as is, the parking and zoning is all fine. If RARA changed their mission to be a poetry reading capacity of 100, approved by the fire marshal, that's where problems could come into play, and it'd still be RARA if they still own it and are using it for such things as fundraisers or what have you. I'm not mentioning, I just looking for clarification, to understand the purpose. My perception is the intent is RARA owns this, if they sell it to someone who then does that, they would have to come for a conditional use permit, their zoning and what have you. But as long as RARA owns the property, there are no issues. They're good with the way they're operating and the parking. It doesn't have a more intensive requirement.
Correct. And this was a RARA requested provision, and I believe their concern is that the city might require either additional parking that they would have to somehow accommodate for whatever reason, and they don't want to eat up the space they have with additional parking if that's required by the city. But this was not something we put in as something for our benefit. This was something RARA requested.
But if RARA still owned the building and they changed the use of the building or a portion of the building, they would still then be okay. Like, I don't know what that could be, but if they converted a portion of the building to, I don't know, a bed and breakfast, no, Airbnb, I don't know, renting space to sublease, renting space or something to that effect because they don't need all the square footage. And does that business then, if they required more parking, they wouldn't need to have it?
Right. Presumably anything can happen. And I suppose since Arnie is here, I might ask him to weigh in on specifically what would trigger changes to the zoning requirements. And we could speculate as to what might happen that could cause problems, but.
But instead of speculating, we do have a representative of the board and RARA. John, if you'd like to come up and speak to this issue.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that was my request that be put in there. And the specific wording was not intended to cover, any change of use. The intent of this was that if the building is used in a substantially similar way that it is being used presently, that there are no parking issues. And I think the reason that came up is I'm not sure there has ever been a real zoning evaluation of the use of that building. Certainly, there are many present uses of that building that exceed the parking that's available on site. Having the loading there is one example. Many of the activities in the downstairs room that the city rents it out, or even that the rescue squad used it for, expand what is needed. We want to make sure that similar use is not limited because we don't have any other alternatives for additional parking. That was the intent.
And certainly community tables utilizing it, there's more intensity of the parking. Once it becomes owned by RARA, the city comes down and says, you've got community table, you need more parking. So that's what the intent of the language.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Alligood.
I have a comment or a question. One of the points that was discussed prior to the sale or the proposed sale of the Piovano building dealt in a major way with the parking question. If Gaskins Echelon had developed and they needed all that parking space. And one question that occurred was, well, maybe there could be sharing of parking spaces with adjoining businesses so that they could somehow meet the parking needs when, assuming that an apartment house is built. And so are we talking possibly with this arrangement, are we talking about the possibility of sharing parking with whatever's built on the adjoining 2 acres with this parking that exists on the Piovano site?
There's certainly nothing that would restrict that, but presumably that would be between RARA and whoever is owning the additional parcels, that would be an agreement that they would work out.
Go ahead. I would also say that have to be something approved in the site plan at off-site parking. We'd have to count that as parking that we had agreed to. The stipulations would be effective enough that it would count as off-site parking. Whether it was with RARA or the medical center or anyone else, that would have to be something that complied with our definition of what parking meant. So,
Sorry.
go ahead.
I think we have protections against something nefarious happening. I think RARA's intent is they want to be a community center and allow community activities going on, and don't want the city to come in and say, you can't have more than 40 people or 20 people here, so that they can continue to host community events.
I completely understand. Like, your point is great. Like, there's never been a zoning audit of this property. Are all the uses conforming uses? Are they non-conforming uses? And everyone looked the other way when the city owned it. And now when you own it, are you in violation of the zoning ordinance? And you're just focused on the parking, but overall, are you in, violation of anything? And if residents say, that's not allowed there now. I see your point. And I just also, though, saw Dennis's point of just clarifying this would not convey with the property, the whole,
I totally understand, and I don't think there's anything nefarious about this request. I just feel like the language in number 4 is a little overbroad. And is there a way to provide RARO the assurances that they need without saying that we won't object to the number of parking spaces regardless of the use? It's obviously it's fine now, but we don't know in the future. And if there's another way to say this, that.
Yeah, I think you brought up a very good point, and I'm sure we can come up with some language that covers what the intent is.
Mr. Ellisted and Mr. Ayers, maybe we could say for the current or equivalent use of the building. So if it's the sort of equivalent uses that the buildings currently have, then it would be fine. If it's going to be an auditorium, it won't be fine. Mr. Elstad, would that be appropriate?
Yeah, that or reasonably similar would be some words I use, but I can, that's certainly something that we can clarify very quickly, I think.
I think that goes back to the point of the purpose of tonight is to nail down language that we are going to vote on at a subsequent meeting. So now is the time to decide on language. So if we want to put current or reasonably similar use, current or reasonably similar between for and use of the building towards the end of that clause. So it would read, the seller agrees that the existing marked parking spaces will be sufficient to meet any and all parking-related zoning requirements of the zoning ordinances and standards for a current or similar use of the building. And then we can litigate current and similar use.
A question for Artie. Do we have parking requirements for anything that's not either housing or a business? Do we have?
Many different parking requirements in section 12 for off-street parking. So you're just saying in general, is it only business or residential?
Right, like community centers specifically, we do have
We have
requirements.
several different public assemblies, so that's why I was having
Okay, that's
a
right.
like use. If we go from one type of public assembly to another type of public assembly, that was a similar or like use, so I think we're covered there. So I was glad to hear that part.
Okay.
I'm not sure I'm answering your question.
You are answering my question, thank you.
I think the one question that I didn't bring up here is that the city has uniformly over the years, when there is activity, especially in the downstairs meeting room, that they've opened up parking on Spotswood Drive, which is presently not allowed unless it's changed over the years. And the city has always just said, yeah, no problem. It can be used, like for voting, for the larger events in the meeting room downstairs. I mean, we certainly would hope that that would continue as needed.
John, just to confirm the language that Jared suggested, you don't have an objection to tonight. I know that you're not,
No,
you
I
can't speak
don't.
for the board, but
I don't.
Okay.
They'll have to trust me on this one.
fair enough. Fair enough. We have a motion and a second that offer that modification. And before that, Dennis, were there any other language? Okay. Would you accept that?
Yes, I accept that modification to number 4.
And the second, Chuck?
Agreed.
Very good.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask just one point of clarification?
You can ask all the questions you
What
want.
the city attorney referred to concerning the public hearing. What then is the status of this contract? Is it a legally binding contract once it's signed?
Once it's signed, but it won't be signed until after we take a vote at a subsequent meeting after a public hearing.
Okay, I see.
Because we've had no public hearing on the sale
The sale of
of
real
the
estate.
property.
All right, so then the closing date would be based upon that, upon approval of that, and then signature of the document.
I think the document reflects July 16th with the expectation our next meeting and public hearing would be held on the 15th. So the 16th would be first opportunity for
All right.
both parties to sign it and start the 90 days.
I understand that.
Does that make
Thank you.
sense? Does that answer your question? Okay.
But it also includes, in no circumstance will closing be later than October 31st.
Unless agreed upon by both parties.
Yes, we can always agree to modify as we go forward.
As we sort through the details, we have the shared common goal of supporting RAH and working towards a sale of this property to that organization. Have a motion and a second. We have an amendment that's been accepted. I would ask if there's any more discussion. Hearing none, I'd ask for a roll call vote. Ms. Strawn?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler? Aye. Mr. Alligood?
Aye.
Ms. Alexander?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. John, thank you for your time and talents and patience in getting through this. I was discussing with someone earlier today. In January, didn't appear RAH had any interest in this building whatsoever. In February, they did. And I'm glad that we've gotten to this point and look forward to the 15th of July when we can have our public hearing, hear from the public, and council take the next step in this journey. Thank you for being with us. Next item is 10.2, City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the items I did want to touch on very briefly first is that as a holdover from item 10.1, we will need a survey of the parcel that will be sold to RARA as the Piovano parcel. Of course, the adjacent green space will also need to be surveyed as a separate parcel. Further, there's the parcel that was annexed to the cemetery, has never been described as a separate parcel. We have the Spotswood Street itself, and in fact, Taylor Street extended. It had been a dead end, now it was extended into Spotswood, so that has to be described as part of a city street. Between the intersection of Taylor and Spotswood, part of the property there is also an empty lot that sits there that was originally part of this parcel and will have to be surveyed and platted. We also have a short strip of property in front of 407 Spotswood, which is further down towards Houston Street. And that strip of frontage is very small, not usable for anything else. And right now it's the access for 407 Spotswood. So we need to describe that and probably adjoin it to 407 Spotswood. So I've contacted Randy Trout of Trout Land Surveying, and he will be doing the survey as quickly as possible. But then all of those parcels will also have to be platted. They were never platted, of course, and so they'll have to go to the Planning Commission for plat approval. So there will be somewhat of a delay there. I spoke with Mr. Jenkins about that. He said it wouldn't delay the proceedings of the public hearing or the signing of the contract, but just to keep everyone informed those activities had not occurred in the past and will all have to occur now. For both the Spotswood sale of the project, or the sale of that land for a possible development project, and also for the sale and the handing over the property to RARA. With regard to those entities or parties that are interested in proposals and may want to develop the property, I did speak with all of them. Mentioned, as Mr. Grigsby said, an August 1st deadline to have something in. I felt that was in the best interest of the city. Heard Mr. Grigsby and understood his point of view, but I do believe that since January or February, there's been adequate discussion of this property. If anyone had an interest in developing it or putting a proposal together, they certainly could have done so. So that was what I had communicated to those individuals who had put in proposals in the past and asked if they would be interested in putting in a new proposal, submitting an updated or revised proposal. They all said they would consider it, or they absolutely would. Only one proposer said he had to think about this as well going forward. So that's where I stand with this. If council would like to extend that date, I'm fine with that, but I did believe that it was in our best interest, given the time that's already elapsed, to continue to move forward.
I would say Mr. Grigsby's point is well taken about possibly delaying the deadline. I mean, I'm not sure that we should have a deadline that predates the actual closing of the sale of the Piovano building, for starters. And, you know, the construction industry is in a bit of turmoil right now, and it may be that developers would have more clarity as to what they could do if we gave them a bit more time. Now, I do believe that we've been relatively clear publicly with what we're looking for, which we believe the best use of this property is residential. We've made that pretty clear, and I do think it's incumbent upon developers to contact the city if they are interested, but I do think that a delay in the deadline makes some sense.
I guess I'd like to hear from, have the developers made that comment to you that they need more time? I would like to get an idea of which developers are truly serious about this. We did have some proposals, some of them were very vague, so it was hard to gauge their true level of interest.
When I spoke with them, they did not indicate that there was a problem with that time frame or any subsequent comment of that nature. However, I'd be very willing to call them back up and specifically put that question to them. So I'm not opposed to extending. Again, as I noted to you, my intent was to keep the process moving. If council feels there's a need or justification to try and extend it a little bit to give people more time, I'm fine with that.
I would say my perception was that it was a due date, not a deadline, so that if folks weren't prepared, there's some wiggle room there. Words have some significance from that standpoint, and I think council's always been of the mindset we want the best, take as much time as necessary to get the best possible outcome. So working through that process. But I will speak to the point of doing an RFP. With the developer, individuals that we've talked to about developing property in the city of Lexington, they were, so we modified the due date or deadline. Words have meaning.
Jared, what do you think?
You made the motion, so I believe the intent was, and that, I didn't mean that.
Okay,
to
well, we
elicit
all
laughter.
voted,
Well, I thought your intent
so
was.
to clarify, we
I thought your
will
intent was
say
a
due
deadline.
date.
We may have to go back to the tape and hear the actual motion, but your intention was due date.
Due date.
Very good. Anyone want to change their vote? Due date. Fair enough. Thank you all very much, and thank you, City Manager, and for your engagement with the developers and people interested in creating progress in our city. Boards and Commissions, the Blue Ridge Resource Authority, Mr. Smith.
No report.
Main Street, Lexington, Ms. Strong.
Sure. Remember, the Children's 4th of July Bike Parade will be on Saturday, this Saturday, July 3rd, to prevent any conflict with church traffic. Bike decorating and face painting begins at 10 a.m. at the Hub on Main Street next to Oak Grove Cemetery. The parade starts at 11 a.m. and finishes at the W&L parking lot at Henry and Jefferson Streets. Only children 12 and under should be on wheels. Adults should walk, and well-behaved dogs on leashes are welcome. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Strawn. Any questions? Planning Commission.
The Planning Commission met on Thursday, June 24th, and we unanimously approved an application by Roy Leneve for a site plan review for Heritage Hall at 205 Houston Street. They're adding a pavilion adjacent to their facility. And we also continued crafting an ordinance for small cell wireless facilities. That's all I have unless there's any questions.
Any questions from council? Regional Tourism Board, Mr. Ayers.
Thanks. The board won't meet again until July 14th, but I did have a couple items to mention. First, a personnel announcement. Tourism's Visitor Services Manager Denise Nays has left us last month. Tourism Director Jean Clark is in the process of interviewing candidates for her replacement. A few other items. Be sure to check out WSLS Channel 10 Evening News tomorrow evening. WSLS has been spotlighting Lexington and Rockbridge all week, and tomorrow they'll be live casting segments both from Hopkins Green and from Balloons Over Rockbridge at the Horse Center. And you might also spot our own Mayor Frank enjoying a downtown carriage ride. Also on Friday, bluegrass band The Seldom Scene will be playing at Limekiln Theater. Concert starts at 8, and I believe tickets are still available for sale via limekilntheater.org. And finally, on Sunday, there's the July 4th fireworks concert and dance at Buena Vista's Glen Morey Park. And that's all I got.
Any questions for Dennis? Terrific. Rockbridge Area Recreation Organization.
I just would reshare the news of the state baseball tournament that's happening at Fox Field, and I appreciate the News Gazette covering it a lot on their website to promote it. Appreciate the partnership with tourism just to get some information out about attractions and things to do around here. But obviously it rained today quite a bit when baseball should have been being played. But I trust that the fields are going to be in great shape tomorrow, and that Lexington and Rockbridge County will be a great place for all these teams to play. So that concludes my report.
And driving up by Brubaker Field this afternoon, probably about 3:30, the children seem to be having a ball, having weathered the storm. They were getting ready to take the field. Threshold, Ms. Alexander.
No report tonight.
Thank you, ma'am. MSA, Mr. Alligood.
The first of many MSA reports, I would say. I attended the MSA meeting this week and learned that MSA is contemplating sharing $500,000 approximately, splitting with the city and the county, for the purpose of spending that money to reduce the, I call I&I, infiltration and infusion that would reduce the wastewater, stormwater runoff going to the waste treatment plant. Apparently there's a substantial impact. And they've set aside money to share with the localities to help reduce the impact on the wastewater plant. But for the past couple of years, it's been frozen. And when the pandemic began, it happened to coincide with the time when the MSA had already raised their rates, and they were concerned that they needed to raise rates even more, and so they were reluctant to free up that money. And so now they're talking about having a little surplus, and because of that, there's a reluctance to raise rates if there's a surplus. And so sharing that money is on the table, and the city manager should expect a call shortly, I would assume, based on what I heard. The big shoe that dropped at the meeting was that the facility study that the MSA had commissioned over a year ago to the tune of around $200,000, is first draft due to be released to the Board of Directors of MSA in the middle of July, this month. And it's in that document where the multi-millions of dollars of expenditures will be outlined to upgrade to pay for the necessary upgrades to the wastewater and water treatment plants. And so that's the big shoe that's getting ready to drop, and that's the one that'll substantially raise water and sewer rates to all the users. And so we're sitting on pins and needles waiting to see just what those numbers are. I don't know those numbers yet, but should know them when the meeting occurs middle of the month. End of report.
Thank you, Mr. Alligood. Any questions for Mr. Alligood? Very good. Under my report, for your consideration is the contract renewal for the city manager. You recall we performed a review at our last meeting in closed session, and upon coming back into session, directed the city attorney to increase the city manager's compensation by 3%, $1,000 bonus, and to change the language in his contract that he will not be participating in recommendations of the staff increases in the future. And that contract was in your packet, and I would ask for council's consideration.
And so to clarify, we are doing what previously was contractually obligated, because the contract that is currently in place obligated us to compensate the city manager the same way as city staff. So we are following through on that contractual obligation. And then after that, we're modifying, adjusting the contract to actually remove that stipulation that requires us to treat him exactly like the rest of city staff.
Correct.
I'm clarifying that for myself and for the public, anyone listening. So we are.
Absolutely.
So I'll make a motion that we provide those $1,000 and the 3%, and that we also then modify the contract as presented.
Very good. We have a motion.
Second.
Motion is second. Any further discussion? I would add, David, to your clarification, there are two employees for city council, city manager and the city attorney, and we're responsible for their review and compensation. So going forward, it'll be incumbent upon city council to do a timely review, and also if there's intended to provide an increase in compensation, that be properly budgeted for. So, as for a roll call vote, Mr. Ayers. Aye. Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alligood.
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler.
Aye.
Ms. Strong.
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. Quite a few random details to share with you. I will start first and foremost by recognizing, I don't know if you've enjoyed your time at Hopkins Green or taking strolls on Woods Creek Trail, but that was accomplished under the leadership from 1972 to 1987 under John Doan, who passed away last week. His family had a visitation today, and he'll be buried in Quantico tomorrow. If you didn't know John, too bad. He was a great guy, had a tremendous amount of energy, a terrific laugh, and a great deal of wit. Graduated from Lynchburg College and for his undergraduate degree in economics, and University of Virginia for his master's in public administration. But his son Kent and daughter Catherine were in town today welcoming folks, old hands like John Ellisted and myself, and a cast of other characters. And it was a lovely afternoon, and the family was very uplifted and heartfelt by all the outreach. But encourage you to pause and think about John Doe next time that you visit either Woods Creek Trail or Hopkins Green specifically, but there are lots of other things that he was involved in. And if you check with John, you probably get some good stories about our friend and former city manager, John Doan, and our condolences to his family. You probably received in the mail a document from Kendall that was an economic impact. If you haven't taken a look at that, I encourage you to do so. Terrific document, and the impact, financial impact and social impact that Kendall has on our community is significant. And as a past board member and finance committee member, excited to see their continued progress and support of our community. Some of you were able to attend the town hall meeting with Chief Green at First Baptist, and she has more opportunities to spend time with her and learn about her ambitions for the police department. July 22nd at the Lexington House, so mark your calendar and pray for good rain. For those of you who have not signed up for the VML conference, that'll be in, I believe, October rather. Janie has shared that information, but encourage you to, the VML conference generally is very helpful and a good way to meet some of our peers around the state, and encourage you to consider going and broadening your horizons relative to that. I mentioned earlier, and we're creeping closer to acquiring the VDOT property. And I just want to publicly again declare I'm hopeful for a South Main Street renaissance, where lots of those properties are fluffed and buffed and lots of changes going on. Part of the conversation we had with our joint meeting with the Planning Commission is having proper zoning and looking for opportunities for areas, and that certainly is in focus for me, and I hope for all of council and city staff. The Planning District Commission met last week as well, and we received an update on a regional agriculture center proposal. Keith Holland and Margaret Ann Smith have participated in that from our locality. It's an interesting concept. The design is about a 42,000 square foot facility that would allow for canning, processing to be used by individuals as well as commercial kitchens and things of that nature. The PDC is still moving forward with that concept. There are a couple, I think, in Southwest Virginia and also in South Central Virginia. And we're trying to learn from best practices there, but continue to have a focus on our agricultural assets in our community. And the PDC, of course, stretches from Rockingham County over to Bath. And additionally, I just want to report one of the benefits of being the chair of the Planning District Commission was the opportunity to have a tour of the Blue Ridge Crozet Tunnel Greenway this past Wednesday. It was hotter than blue blazes, or it was very hot, and but it was great being in the tunnel. The water that's dripping down in it made for a lovely afternoon of being very comfortable, and it is a remarkable piece, asset of our community. And I encourage you, there's it's being advertised and promoted as a greenway. Part of the concept is to put some connectivity and sidewalks going from this area into the city of Waynesboro. They have approximately 1,000 acres, 750 of it's private, 250 acres are owned by the city that they hope to use for camping and recreation and what have you. But all of that leads down to currently a kombucha facility and Basic City Brewery. And we did conclude our tour with pizza and beer at Basic City, and highly recommend that agenda if you have the opportunity. Take friends, family, and others. Dwayne Jones has been the Director of Parks and Recs for the City of Waynesboro, and he's been working on this since 2001, so it's really neat to see the creation. So when you talk about planning, he's really excited after 20 years to finally have the tunnel open and the greenway available for general public. Plenty of parking and no fees to access. Other pieces, we have 2 positions open for the Planning Commission. John Driscoll's term is ending at the end of this month, and he has indicated he would like to re-up, if you will. We had applications from Arthur Bartenstein, Nicholas Betts, Alicia Bostic, and Mary Stuart Harlow as well for those 2 positions. Alicia has indicated, has been appointed to the Community Services Board and no longer interested in the planning, but I would ask for council's consideration to fill those 2 slots, preferably to fill for the July 31st expiration, August 1st start.
I regret with that many applicants that we don't have more spots on the Planning Commission, but I move to approve John Driscoll and Mary Stuart Harlow to the Planning Commission.
Very good. Have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll go ahead and second that for discussion.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I feel that we need a bit more time to make this decision. I prefer to hold over this decision until our next city council meeting. So I would be voting against this, but only because of that, not because of any issues with Ms. Harlow.
I guess I was thinking we are having our organizational meeting, the next meeting, but John has already said he does not want to be chair, so that is fine with me.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Yes, ma'am.
And I'll just note, John will not be able to participate in that meeting, but he may not. Is he planning on being there?
What was the question?
Was John going to be absent next meeting? Anyway, it doesn't matter. He won't be able to participate, but again, I think that's probably okay.
Well, one thing, if the vote fails to appoint these 2, then anyone who's serving would continue to serve until they've been replaced, if that makes sense. No. His term expires, well, scratch my comment. Let's take a vote and see where we go.
Actually, to clarify though, his term expires July 31st, is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, so it won't matter as long as we make this vote next city council meeting.
Yeah. Very good. Have a motion and a second, and Leslie, you have something else?
I'd be happy to just withdraw the motion if, I will withdraw the motion.
Okay. I look forward to council bringing back a motion at our next meeting. Very good. And I think that concludes, before concluding my report, we're fortunate to have so many quality people willing to present themselves to be considered for Planning Commission. It is a tough decision, so look forward to getting it next time on the 15th. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a little update on something I commented on at the last meeting. Columbia Gas continues to work here in the city. Probably most of you have noticed they are going to continue to work on Lewis, Washington, and Nelson Street for probably a number of weeks yet. Most of that work will probably shift eventually to East Nelson Street. And of course, we've seen a number of detours and road closures. We've also experienced some open cuts that have remained open for an inordinate amount of time, and staff is working with Columbia Gas to make sure that does not continue. A little comment on permit activities. We've had a very strong year in permits. In the month of June, 14 permits were issued worth an estimated of $973,000 $886 in real estate improvements. Now, that's just improvements to real estate. That's not revenue for the city, but that's a very positive sign. For the fiscal year, the value of improvements from permit activity is $13,419,509. Of course, these are estimates based on the value of the contracts that were let, but still, it's a good sign. 96 permits were issued during the year with $92,292 in permit fees collected. Also a good sign, in June alone, there were 25 zoning or planning inquiries, which compares with 115 for the entire year. So 22% of those inquiries actually occurred in June. So there's increasing activity as to zoning and planning activity and possible movement in that area, if you will. On the Enfield water tank development, which was the city's first foray into developing excess city property, Mr. Edwin Gaskin, who we have an agreement with to consider that property for development, met with our public works staff, Jeff Martone and Thomas Wagner, and they reviewed the underground utilities on the site, the easements that would be necessary for that, setbacks, and drive access to the site. There was no confirmation that any work would begin, but this was just a further step in their due diligence, and it was a good, positive conversation that occurred. I think Mr. Gaskin was very pleased to hear and see what we knew about that site so he could take that into his planning efforts. New Market Street Place renaming. That petition, of course, came in some time ago. The background work is now done, and I hope to hold a public hearing, schedule that for you to consider it at our next meeting. So I wouldn't say that work was difficult. It's just finding your way through all of the ins and outs of what needs to be required. The first time around took a little more time with some of the other items that were presented to me in the last month and a half. So it's a little more than 30 days, but in the future that should not be a problem. American Rescue Plan funds have been received. Our first payment, which is half of those funds, we received from the state a pass-through amount of $3,862,674, and straight from the U.S. Treasury, $723,149. We will receive a similar payment to this next year at this time, and the total that we should receive is near $9,171,646. So we will receive a significant amount of funding. There are restrictions on how that money can be used, but we have a significant opportunity before us, and we do have time to consider that, how we use that funding. It's not like the CARES Fund where we had 9 months to make a decision. Little update from the fire department. In June, another record was reached, 305 calls in the month of June. Typically, on average, we see 220 to 230 calls. And the department also hired their they filled their last vacant position, and they have a new firefighter who's starting very soon. New to the department, but he is experienced. He's worked with the city of Lynchburg and Campbell County, so he comes to us fully trained. Just on little detail of some of the calls the fire department handles. Some are very mundane, but they did rescue a small dog that had fallen into a 5-foot deep window well. A cyclist who fell and sustained multiple injuries on the Chessie Trail. They responded to that call. And they also responded to an individual stuck in an elevator. So some of the calls, the majority are very mundane, and some are a little unique. On the legal side of the issue, we've heard of this before, and Mr. Jenkins, our attorney, is working with our firefighters on this, but 5 of them were deposed on July 26th in regard to a lawsuit against a regional medical provider, and they were represented by the attorney, and this legal activity does not involve the city, but they were witnesses to the activities that did occur, so they were deposed. In the police department, we hired the last civilian opening, or filled that opening with Taylor Fisher, and she was hired as another administrative support, and specifically to be our accreditation manager for the city. The department is now fully staffed, other than they have one other officer position to fill. Little update on the Emergency Communications Center. I think we all have followed over the last number of months that we're trying to purchase an updated computer-aided dispatch and records management system. Our law enforcement and fire and rescue staff met with SOMA, the representatives of the firm that we are interested in putting a contract in place with. Many of the questions that were outstanding were answered, and so the committee that was selected by the ECC committee is going to be negotiating a contract with SOMA. So we hope to move forward quickly now and put a contract in place that does provide adequate protections for the city so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where in the future maybe we're dissatisfied with that product as we were in the past. In fact, if we're dissatisfied, the contract has been agreed to already by the owner, not written, but they would give us a complete refund if we're not satisfied in the future with the product or the rollout of the project. So we've had very good luck working with that firm. Update on radar. Ridership is now increasing. Of course, with COVID in place, there were restrictions and the ending of service that has now, of course, restarted that service, and the Maury Express is up 106% from this time last year in June, and there were 1,015 riders in June of this year as opposed to last year. Just a note on an article that you probably saw in the paper about the jail commission and Mr. Higgins' retirement, and I did like to say or want to say that the commission did not vote to take Mr. Higgins' VRS retirement away from him. The commission voted instead to certify to VRS that a felony was committed and he was convicted of that felony, and the activities that he was convicted for occurred during his job or his job-related activities. So that will be reported to the VRS, and VRS will determine whether or not he then loses his retirement. So that decision has not been made by, and cannot be made by the jail commission, and it has not been made yet by VRS. Whether that occurs or not will be seen. That is what the law says, but just wanted to point out the jail commission was not responsible for that decision, beyond our pay grade. So that's what I have to report, and we'll answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for the city manager? Has the jail commission located an attorney yet?
They have not made a decision on that yet. They have had some responses, so we have some positive progress on that.
Very good, very good. Thank you, sir. Before we go to the city attorney, I wanted to rewind just a bit. There were two items I wanted to bring to your attention. One, at your seat is a report from the Department of Social Services with some details. And Emma, glad to get you a copy of that so you have it for your purposes. And then there was also a note sent by Doris and Jim Vargo. Our policy in the past has certainly, we invite people to come and speak to council. In our Zoom time, we allowed letters to be sent in and read into the record. And as we get back in person, we will, I anticipate, embrace that policy of inviting people to come and speak. But just want to make you aware of communication from the Vargos. I'll read briefly just as opposed to mailing it to you later. Dear City Council, you have our sincere gratitude for taking your time and studying well the proposal to sell the Spotswood property. You have kindly heard my remarks several times. There are so many small towns that have lost their status and brand by being lured into overdevelopment. I would like to identify some of these lost small town Main Street communities, as I have lived in some of them, but probably best to let you know they are all around Virginia from Washington, D.C., moving out in a concentric circle. It is my wish that Lexington stays a Main Street community. It is my hope that the City Council can find a way to resist the sale of the property for multi-housing rental units. Thank you for your service, Doris and James Vargo, 407 Spotswood. And with that, I'd call on the City Attorney for his report.
Actually, I have a few things tonight. First of all, I want to apologize, Dennis. Earlier when I said on the deadline due date that it was your motion, I didn't intend that to be as impolite or as dismissive as that came out. It was intended to start sort of fleshing out what you actually intended by your motion. So I apologize that came out the way it did, and then the conversation moved on from there. Certainly not my intent. Jim mentioned the depositions of the 5 firefighters, EMTs. They've been scheduled for July 26th, so they haven't actually taken place yet. But we're planning to do those at the fire station after those 5 folks get off of their shift to try and make things as easy as we can on them. And the other attorneys involved have been very amenable to working with us and working with those individuals to sort of get in and get out and hopefully make it as straightforward as possible on our folks. Jim mentioned the jail commission has received at least one that I can vouch for application to be their attorney. We submitted it, I submitted it, myself and the Mann Legal Group to be their representative. We had not, for whatever reason, been made aware that there was an opening or that they were requesting proposals until Jim brought it up in a conversation somewhat unrelated. So I volunteered that they need someone, that we would do it. I don't foresee any conflicts with the city. This is somewhat common. I know Brian Kearney is the city attorney for Buena Vista, as well as the Emergency Communications Center. So it's not unheard of for sort of folks who do this line of work to represent different bodies. But obviously, if anyone has any concerns or think that would be a problem for the city, I'm happy to either address that or withdraw that application with the jail commission. But I did want you guys to be aware that we've thrown our hat in the ring. Lastly, I believe the mayor asked for an update on the opioid situation, for lack of a better word. There is progress being made. Some of it is sort of at the end, the finish line. Some of it is creeping there. There's really two separate but related issues. One is the amount of money that's going to be put into a fund to address the issue, and the other is how those funds are going to be allocated. The first is a little bit complicated. There are a number of different sources of funds, manufacturers, distributors, and a number of different forum to determine who's going to pay what. Some of it is in court. There's a test case essentially in West Virginia now pending for some of that to determine liability. The Sackler family, you might have read about, has declared bankruptcy and has currently trying to wash their hands of the issue. There was an initial agreement for the individuals in the family to contribute a sum of money, as well as the actual entity, the company that was manufacturing. That actually today, it was yesterday and today was mediation to try and get more funds from the family. Johnson & Johnson has recently concluded their settlement with some states. So those are all sort of getting towards the finish line. So I think there is an end in sight for a global sort of settlement to determine what the actual pot of money is going to be. We don't have any role really in any of that other than monitoring how things are going. Separately, in determining how those funds are going to be allocated, the municipalities that have signed on as part of trying to seek these funds, including the city of Lexington, have come to an agreement. The group of municipalities have come to an agreement with the Attorney General's office and how those funds will be allocated. And currently, the agreement is that whatever sort of the bucket ends up being, 15% of that bucket will go directly to localities, 15% will be reserved by the state, and 70% will go into the new opioid abatement authority, which is a new creation of the General Assembly this past session. And that 70% will then be subdivided in a similar way between the state, the sort of running of the authority itself, as well as localities. The details are all being worked out in terms of limitation on use of funds. One of the big limitations is a lot of folks are pushing that the funds that the municipalities receive have to be dedicated to the opioid abatement, specifically to that issue of trying to decrease the problem both currently and going forward. And there's some amount of the funds that are going to be essentially unrestricted. So that entity, that agreement is going to come up for consideration probably within the next month or 2 months, and that's something that we will need to present to council for y'all to vote on, agreeing to join this sort of, it's a memorandum of understanding. I'm not sure what the actual legal sort of agreement's going to be, if it's just going to agree that we're participating under this structure. That's all to be determined, but we have gotten the heads up from our council who's running everything to say, you know, this will be coming under discussion for all the municipalities, the governing bodies in the next few months. So that should be fairly straightforward. All of the details have been worked out, and it will basically be an up or down vote. Yes, we agree to participate under these terms, or no, we do not. And I feel certain, after I review it, once we see the final documents, I feel certain my recommendation will be to participate under the given terms. So that's just to tee that up. So we're, again, creeping towards the finish line. I would say the end is in sight in terms of both allocation and the amount of funds. But as of today, nothing is definitive, but we're getting there. And with that, I conclude my report and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for making some sense of the chaos that is the opioid settlement. I read an article about Johnson & Johnson settling with the state of New York, and asked JR to give us an update. It sounds like it's a fascinating industry to be in as we work towards. Mr. Alligood.
Just a quick question. Is there any projection of the settlement amount that would come this way to Lexington?
So far, the only thing definitive is Lexington's share with the other municipalities. And there is I'm not sure what his actual area of expertise is, but a professor at UVA who has come up with a model to determine this based on population at one scale, but also trying to address the actual direct costs of opioid addiction and treatment in these communities. And Lexington ends up with an allocation of 0.093% of the state's funds. So that's all we know from now. We're talking the projected sort of total bucket is in the billions of dollars. But ultimately, I think in terms of direct payments, we're probably, I would say roughly $100,000. Maybe not that much depending on how things work out, but that's, I would say that's for very broad sort of back of the envelope planning purposes. That's the ballpark of what we're potentially looking to gain. And I should also caveat that with, it's still unclear at this point of that, whatever we do get, it's unclear what percentage of that is going to required to be specific to opioid abatement and what is a bit more broader ambit for what we can use it for.
Ever interesting and more details to emerge. Thank you for the question, Mr. Alligood. Next item on the agenda is new business, consideration of appointment of an ARPA uses committee. You may recall when we had the CARES Act, we deployed David and Leslie as a team of two to work with city staff and bring before you a recommendation to, if they are willing, for David and Leslie to redeploy in that capacity and work with city staff to bring back recommendations. Other than David and Leslie, are there any objections? Very good. If not, ARPA Uses Committee will begin and serve until that topic is exhausted. And I'm not aware of any other new business or closed session, but thank you again for attending the Planning Commission meeting and your time and talents. And don't forget all the fun activities going on in the community, and everyone have a happy and safe 4th of July. We are adjourned. Oops, sorry.